So the way we do it now is we work with a bookkeeper who uses QuickBooks. And so on a weekly basis, we send her batch files that I think are Excel spreadsheets that she then enters into her QuickBooks. And so I guess the question is, best practices in the Virtuous environment, what's the right way to do our integration, our interface with our bookkeeper using QuickBooks?
The answer, as it is with most things, is really kind of, it depends.
Okay.
Right? It depends on what version of QuickBooks they're using. It depends on the volume of gifts. It depends on the structure they're using in QuickBooks and how that relates to Virtuous.
So the volume of gifts is about probably no more than 15 or 20 individual gifts per week. So it's
okay.
She, I believe, uses, I think this is, I don't know the right terminology, but I'm sure she uses the desktop version of QuickBooks. And just looking through the training material and, you know, playing around a little bit, I think my thought is that we export to her IFF or IIF. Is it IIF or IFF?
IIF.
IIF files that she then directly imports to QuickBooks. So that's kind of my starting point. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the IIF file's for, right? It's a proprietary file type that Intuit came up with for QuickBooks for desktop. By the time they got to QuickBooks Online, they support CSV files like every other program. Right. But QuickBooks Desktop has that IIF file type, and you can export to that from a gift query. You can export to that once you've imported a batch, either way, and then sync that data over into QuickBooks. The critical thing there, and the critical piece between the two systems, is going to be your projects. Yes. Right? Because the projects that you use in Virtuous, and specifically the project codes, need to match up with the coding that you're using in QuickBooks.
Yeah. Okay. And that's analogous to what we do now, because we have, we call them funds. So you call them projects. So all of the gifts are, the way it works today, all of our gifts are tied to funds, and those get exported out to our bookkeeper. So.
Sounds good. Wait, let's just walk through a couple of things here then. And here's what I will do is I'm going to give you control of the keyboard and mouse. So now you should be able to move that around on my screen. And let's go ahead and set up a batch and just key in a few GIFs, because if there are other things that come up as we go through, we want to make sure we address those. And then it sounds like we're already talking some big picture questions, but we can address that, I think, pretty quickly and then move on to receiving.
Okay.
So it should give you, it says it's waiting for you to control my screen.
Okay, I'm wiggling my mouse.
There it is.
There we go.
All right. So let's go ahead and so go ahead and start up a new batch so we can key in some GIFs.
Okay. All right. So where would I do that?
That's the question for you. Where do you do that?
Right here.
There you go. You did very well. Most people click on the GIF screen first, so you're already ahead of the game.
All right. Well, I did click on the GIF screen. Is that right?
No, you're on the gift and contact import screen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Most people see the $sign and go, "Oh, I put GIFs there."
Oh, right. I see. Got it. Okay.
So let's go ahead and set up a new import.
Okay.
That's just downloading the template.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll enter GIFs manually.
Okay.
Especially given the volume that we mentioned, that'll probably happen for any check GIFs and things like that. So we'll assume that we're doing checks since we're manually entering these.
Okay.
There you go. And then we'll set the default diff date to today. We'll assume that all these GIFs are today's GIFs.
What is
So
today?
there you go.
Okay.
That's today.
I'm waking up.
And if you want to give it a default segment, you can.
Okay.
If you type in default, for example, remember that those are not drop-down search fields. They're type ahead search fields.
Right. Okay.
And then you can really, pick any of those. Probably the one at the bottom, which is the default. Keep going. There you go. Default communication, default campaign, default everything.
All right.
I don't think there are media outlets or receipt segments in your sandbox. Those wouldn't be set up yet.
By the way, what's just out of curiosity, so there's like these there's these nice named things,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's these obscure numbers and parentheses. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, some of that we'll talk about when we go through campaign training, because segments are part of that campaign structure. And some of that will make a little bit more sense, or we'll fill some of that in at that point.
Okay. All right.
Well, let's go ahead and we want to identify our batch for sure.
Okay. So would this be like today?
Depends. Everybody has their own pattern for how they identify batches. And so a lot of times it might be some variant of the date. So, batch 1.7.19 dash K because they're checks, or, your initials so everybody knows who did the batch. It all depends.
I think she does it pretty simply, so I'll just do that.
And then do you remember what the batch total does?
Yes, now that I read the little hint here. So the batch total, I think, is just something that I enter in, and I believe that's just this, what I've added up. I believe this is what's going in, and so then the system will verify that those two amounts match.
Right. So if you've put together your deposit for the day, right? Hey, here's how much we got in checks. I'm putting in, $3,500. You type in 3,500. Then when you key in all those separate gifts, if they don't total up to 3,500, the system will not let you import because the two amounts don't reconcile.
Yeah.
Now the key is, in order for that to work, we have to take that batch total as a hard control value. So we have to assume that the batch total is correct. So if where you make a mistake is on the batch total, that's a problem. That would just mean you have to delete this import batch and start over again.
Okay.
For today, let's leave it blank because we're just going to make up gifts and things. All right, so we're all set.
Okay. Am I saving this now?
There you go.
Okay.
And let's go ahead and add in a gift. There you go. And for the quick search, just try the first three letters of a name. Try like Bob. There's probably not a Bob in here, but you never know. Of course there's no Bobs in there. Or, no, there's going to be no Johns. It's too complicated. They're always bizarre names. Just try typing H-A-R. Let's see what we find. There's Harmonia and Georgie. Look at that. The Claffs. Of course. So we're going to say this is a gift from Harmonia and Georgie. Okay. There we go. And let's say that they gave $100 going to your general fund.
Okay.
You can make up a check number if you want.
Okay. Oops. What's my check number? Okay. All right, and it's going to the general fund. Okay.
Are you all set?
I think.
Well, there's one thing you have to remember. This is why I like to do this, and this is why it's good to practice too. Is right now we've got a project, but we haven't specified the amount going to that project. And we always have to have an amount, even if it's the full amount of the gift. Now, in this case, because it is the full amount of the gift, all $100 is going to that project. You don't have to retype it. Just hit the plus button there in that split amount field and watch what happens. See how it pulls in the full gift amount?
I see. Uh-huh.
So if it's the full gift amount, I don't have to bother with the typing. I can just hit enter in that field or click on the plus, depends. The whole design of this form is so that if I want to do gift entry with my hands on the keyboard and not touch my mouse, I can. I can tab through all these fields, right? I can even use the quick keys to bring up the new transaction option, and I can go from there. And then if I need to split the gift, I can enter in the split amounts. Right? If it was $50 to do different projects, great. In this case, all 100 is going to the same project, so I can just hit enter. But I always have to have an amount for that project.
Yep. Okay.
And that's one of those muscle memory things that just takes some practice to get used to. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I agree. It's just going to have to be something to remember, because you think like, oh, well, the amount is up there already. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So that's a pretty simple gift. We'll just hit save and continue.
So now let's see. Okay.
And now we've got another gift coming up. So type in the quick search, type in training. So there's the training foundation. So now we've got a check that came in for $2,500 from the training foundation. And it's actually going to be a gift from that foundation, but it's from someone's donor advised fund. So there's actually a donor behind it. So we're going to have to enter them as the pass-through giver. Okay. So let's select the training foundation. All right, and this will be a $2,500 check.
Okay.
And you can make up a check number for it. That's fine.
Okay.
And you know what? I don't know if we have other active projects in here. I didn't get a chance to look. Try typing scholarship in that project field and see if you get. Yeah, the rest of them are all marked as inactive for some reason. I don't know why. So we'll say this one's all going to the general fund as well.
Okay.
And you notice that it pops that one up as an automatic suggestion because that was the last project we did.
Right. Okay.
And if you just type on the enter key, that'll also do the same thing as hitting the plus, right? It'll fill that amount in. And you notice the trash can is there in that split amount field. So I need to see that to know that there's a project on my gift. And similarly, if I need to change the project on a gift, it's not something where I just go into the project field and type. I want to delete that row and add a new project in. So think about it in those terms. But so now we've got our gift put in, but we need to make sure that the right donor is going to get credit for it. So we're going to enter in our pass-through giver, and her first name is Lori, L-O-R-I.
Okay. So hang on here. Get rid of this. So I think what I want to do is let me fiddle a little bit. I don't think this is what I want to do. No, I don't want to do that. Do I want to change the match?
No, because that would say, hey, this doesn't belong on the training foundation record. And it does, right? The check came from the training foundation.
Right.
So I need it to be there, but I want to credit Lori as the pass-through giver. So if you click on that link, that little link that says show all gift information underneath of the form, that'll show you all the less common fields, right? So marking a gift as private, marking the whole gift as non-deductible, adding a receipt date, because usually you wouldn't have that right now because you haven't receipted this gift yet. You're just putting it in.
Okay.
And the tribute, cash accounting code, which is something that relates to QuickBooks. And then your pass-through giver. And that pass-through giver is, again, just a contact search field. So if you type in LORI, there's Lori and Harmon Raven Shear, nice people. So they would be the pass-through giver. So they'll get the pass-through credit on this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So you mentioned the cash accounting code is relevant to QuickBooks. So, so what does that mean? What would I put there?
Typically, you won't have to put anything there because you're going to set up a default accounting code for your organization. And you'll see that there's an article on exporting data for QuickBooks.
Yeah, okay.
That's in the organization settings. And you'll see how to edit your organization settings when we go through admin training. But that's usually just the default account that cash comes in through before it gets dispersed to different funds.
I see. Okay.
Yep. So here, let's hit save and continue. And then we're going to do one more gift here. And so we'll do a quick search for Harrison. Oh, dang, nobody. Okay. So if he doesn't come up, we know that this is actually a check from this donor. So if I don't see anything in that quick search, you can delete that, but then use the first name field. We'll type in first name Harrison, capital H. There we go. And last name Ford.
I got it.
And because we've got a check from him.
Okay.
So now you'll notice at the top right, you get that contact not found. Hey, there's nobody who has this name in your database. But underneath of that, because we have a first name and a last name, it'll start building out a new contact for you. Okay. Until you have a first name and a last name, it won't do that. So if you've got something in quick search and then you just start typing in email addresses and addresses, if you were putting in an organization and you typed in a contact name, that's all great. But you won't see it start building a new record for you until it has a first name and last name, because those are required, right, for any contact. They're really the only requirement to create a contact. So we don't have an email address because nobody puts that on their checks, but let's say we've got a phone number there. We'll do the old 212-555-1212. You know, to check the time and all. And then an address line 1, if you just type 123, it'll give you a bunch of suggestions. And you can pick, let's just pick any one of those that sounds good.
Oh, he probably lives in Florida for sure.
There you go. We're going to use that as is. We know better. And then you should be able to just make up a 5-digit postal code.
Okay.
It won't verify it. And then if you hit tab over to the country column, it'll add that to the record that we're building. So you notice you have to tab out of that field for it to build that for you. Okay. So if you're entering in a check and you don't find that person's name, you can just start keying in all the information, all these fields. It will use that to search. So maybe you type in all this and it says, hey, I found someone with the last name Ford who has that address. I just didn't have the first name Harrison. Well, great. It'll bring that up. But here, even though we've typed in everything, it still says, nope, I got nothing for you. So that's where you would say, okay, well, obviously this is a gift from a new donor. So I'm going to go ahead and create their record.
Okay. So at this point is when I would say create Harrison Ford.
Yep.
Okay.
And once you do that, that is immediate. And this is the thing to know. So we talked before about, hey, if you enter in a batch total and it's wrong, you'd have to delete your import and start over, right? And if you did that, all the gift data that you entered in, you'd have to enter that in again. But if that were to happen with this batch, let's say that you got to the end of it and you had to delete the batch and start over. When you typed in Harrison Ford the next time, it would match him because he's already created. He's already in the database. He has an ID. His ID is 102. There's no gifts on his record, but that contact creation is immediate. It has to be so that we have a record to match that gift to.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay. So now we can put in his gift. Maybe he gave you $5,000 because he's Harrison Ford. So he gave you a nice first-time gift. Probably all go into the general fund again. There you go. And then let's hit save and close.
And by the way, I'm noticing that the extra gift information is already there. Is it that when you're in this environment and once you display the extra gift information, it just stays there as you go through different gifts?
Yep, because we've been saving and continuing, right? So we're saying, hey, look, I've got a number of gifts to enter all in a row, so don't stop me till I'm done. It's you opened it and it stays open till you close it.
All right.
Yep. So now when you save and close, that says, hey, this is the last gift I'm entering. And you notice at the top of the screen, it still gives you your total. Here, you're off the hot seat. I'll take the mouse back.
Okay.
You did well.
Thanks.
There you go. But yeah, so it still gives you that total up here, right? So even though we didn't enter in a batch total, you can still eyeball it and see if that matches up with what you put together for your deposit, right? And then everything is in ready for import down here. There's all my gifts. If I needed to open up any of these, I can just click on it. That'll open it back up again. Okay. And because everything's in ready for import, I've got my import button in blue so I can import all those gifts. If anything ended up in update needed, then I would need to address that, right? Get it all into ready for import before I can add those gifts in. And you might see stuff in update needed because the contact data has changed, right? It might tell you, hey, this is a new email address for the training foundation, or hey, this is a new phone number for Harmonia class or something like that. Do you want to update the contact? Or it might say, hey, there's something wrong with this gift. You've entered in a project code that's inactive. Hey, that segment code doesn't exist. That doesn't happen so much for manual entry because you have to search and find a project. That can happen more often with something like gifts coming over from Virtuous Giving. Right? Hey, this sent us a project code that's not valid. Now that shouldn't happen too often with Virtuous Giving because since it's hooked directly into Virtuous, it's pulling project data from Virtuous to begin with. Or it's usually with third-party systems. But also, if you were to import from a spreadsheet, for example, hey, that project code's not good. It might tell you that. Any of those would cause this to go to update needed, and then you'd have to address the issue before you move forward.
But like you're saying, when I'm doing the manual entry, won't I be flagged for some of those things while I'm doing that?
Not necessarily. In some cases, it might stop you from doing it, right? But not all the time. So I'll show you here. So let's enter a gift in here from Manuel and Alicia. Okay. Well, let's say that I'm moving real fast, right? I'm entering in a bunch of gifts. It's you know, if it's in December, everybody was doing this anyway. And because I'm moving too fast, I'm holding the shift key down, and so I try to put in a $400 gift, and I type that in. It's not going to yell at me at this point, right? Now tab through, check number 456. It's going to be my general fund, and the full amount is going to go to it, and I'm going to hit save and close. It lets me do that, right? Because it's not validating some of the values I'm typing in. In the search for projects, again, if something's inactive, I can't add it because it won't come up in my list. But if I type in something that's bad, where it gets checked and reviewed is when I save that gift. And so that goes to update needed, and it's going to say to me, hey, this is not valid and this is not valid. Oh, whoops. Well, it's not what I meant to type. I meant to type 400. And here, let's delete this. And I'm going to add in, oops, my general fund. And for that, it's the full 400. So again, I can just hit enter. I can save and close, and that'll put it in ready for import. So it's not that it's impossible to have that happen, right, when I'm doing manual entry, but it's less likely. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Okay. And similarly, right, so let's say that we'll add in a transaction, and this one will be for, hey, look, there's Harrison. Good guy. Hey, Harv and Estrellita. That's a good one. So we're going to select them, right? Oh, no, I didn't want to do that. But I'm going to add in this email address here, which is harv@gmail.com. Okay, and I'm going to select them. Oh, I know. I lost my search. There they are. So I put in a $100 gift. And let's say it's also going to be to my general fund. And we'll save and close. Oh, it didn't save the Gmail that I put in. Anyway, that was a bad example because I kept invalidating what I typed. But if I had put in a new email address that was not this email address, that would also have put it into update needed. That's what I get for trying to do it too fast.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
All right, but then once I'm ready, I can hit import up here, and it's going to import those GIFs. It'll go through a validation step, and then it'll import that batch. So while that's going, it's only 5 GIFs, shouldn't be too bad once the queue picks it up. Other than Virtuous Giving and checks that are just coming into the office, are there other services or other sources that you guys have for gifts?
Let's see. Yes, we have. I have a couple that are. Let's see, where do they come in? I guess they end up being manually entered. No, I think that's it. I think we'll just have checks, cash, and online giving.
And all the online giving will be through Virtuous Giving. It's not like you also have PayPal or something else.
That's right.
Nice. PayPal's terrible. Okay. So that makes life easy. Okay, because hey, look, that's important. So for the checks and the cash, and if you do get like stock gifts, non-cash gifts, all that's same, right? Everything flows through this screen.
Okay.
No matter what, if a gift is going into Virtuous, it should be going through this screen. I have people say to me sometimes, hey, buddy, I was on a contact record and I saw where you can add a gift right on the record. Why'd you make me use this tool? This tool, number one, if I put all the gifts in through here, then I have a clear record of all the gifts that have been entered. Right? Everything gets batched, everything has a record, everything is in one place. The other thing is this tool is what's helping me keep my data clean. It's looking out for new email addresses, new addresses, people who are members of the same household, right? Or duplicates are going to pop up when I start to enter information into here. It's also going to help me match gifts to pledges and recurring gifts as payments because the system is going to look for those automatically. Right? All of that happens through this tool. When I go and enter a gift on a contact record, I lose all that stuff. And so that should only be, once in a blue moon because you're doing an adjustment. Hey, I need to fix something. Someone made a mistake in gift entry and I need to go fix it right away before we export our data for the bookkeeper. That kind of thing.
In that case, I was just going to ask that. In that case, what do you do? So say we did all this and then I realized, oops, that check actually said 700, not 100.
Well,
I've already gotten to this point.
You can edit a gift directly.
Okay.
As an admin. So if I click on this big crazy link right here, right now, that'll show me a recap of everything that went in. And if Harmonia and Georgie's gift was actually $200, as an admin, I can go in and edit it and say, nope, this was $200.
Okay.
And the designation should be $200.
I see.
So it's easy enough to go in and make those changes as an admin right in the system. Now, most of the time, though, someone wants to have and especially your auditor will like having a sort of paper trail on that, a little bit more of a paper trail on those adjustments. And especially if you've already synced data to QuickBooks. So let's say you do that every Friday.
Yeah.
And on Monday, you come in and realize there was a mistake in one of Thursday's gifts. Oh, man. Well, now that data has already been sent to QuickBooks. And so then what I would do is I can enter in a reversing transaction.
Okay.
Reversing transaction, remember, is the only gift type that lets you have a negative amount. Right? And I can either do that as part of my batch for the day, or if I wanted to, because again, I'm doing an adjustment, maybe that's where I say, well, I need to go in and put in a reversing transaction for Harrison Ford. This was a mistake. So I'll go to his record, add a gift, and say, I need to add in a reversing transaction for, negative $1,000 or whatever it is. I want to make sure that I do the same thing on the project so that my project totals are correct. All right, but I can do an adjustment that way, and then I could say that this was a mistake. There was $1,000 put on his record that should have been on someone else's record. I would do a reversing transaction here, and then I would go to the correct record, and I would do the check gift there.
I got it.
And you can either do that again. This might be one of the cases where you do actually do it on a contact record, but a lot of our clients will still do those reversing transactions through a batch.
I see.
Right, to again keep everything in one place and have a clear record of everything that happened.
Right. So then that would then be exported out to the QuickBooks, and then it would zero out that negative thing and then add in the new one.
Correct.
Okay. And you'd have that paper trail.
Which would make your auditors happy, for sure.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
So that's how it would handle that. Okay, so your checks, your cash, your stock gifts, all those, they'll get entered in through here. Same thing we just did, right? You add a new import and you set that up. For Virtuous Giving, okay, Virtuous Giving, you'll see the transactions in Virtuous Giving itself. So that's on the marketing side of the tool. You can go into Virtuous Giving and you can see transactions in there as they come in. You can see recurring gifts that have been set up in there as they come in. Those gifts are also sent over, because you want to think of Virtuous Giving and Virtuous CRM as two different things, right? Virtuous Giving is sort of the donor-facing piece. That's what your donors will see and they'll interact with on the donor portal and on your website. Virtuous CRM is where you keep record of everything. Okay, so those are essentially two systems that are just tied in together very well and communicate with each other very well. So as those gifts are made in Virtuous Giving, they'll be sent over to Virtuous CRM, the CRM side of the whole operation. And you can see those if you go to the settings menu and you go to data management. There's this gift transactions. Okay, those are the raw transactions. So if I clicked on that, I'd see gifts in here that have come in from Virtuous Giving that have been sent over via the API. And what happens is those will sit here as they come in through the day. And then at midnight local time for you, according to the time zone for your organization, whatever's set up in your database settings, we'll grab all the transactions sitting in here and we'll bundle them together into an import, and we'll drop that into that gift and contact import tool. Now, if you're feeling really frisky at any point during the day, and you thought, hey, I want to enter some gifts, you could always come into the screen and click bundle up here. That'll grab any transaction sitting here and create a batch of gifts. I only know one client who does that, and I don't really get it because it makes it much harder to reconcile. But hey, he likes it.
So you're saying, just before you go on, so you're saying that as time goes on, so on this cadence of midnight, things that came in from Virtuous through Virtuous Giving show up here, and midnight they automatically get bundled and put into the giving as an import.
Yep.
Giving. Yeah. Okay.
And so then when you come in the next morning right? And you go to this screen here. I'm going to set up a new batch just for fun. And so let's say this is credit. We'll also date them today just for kicks. And we'll call this online, all right, just for fun. We'll save that. Now I'm going to back out of here to this screen. Okay, so you'd see something that looks just like this. It would say processed, because these gifts have been processed. Processed meaning it's gone through and it's taken whatever data is present and it's matched those transactions with as many contacts as possible, right? The name, it'll tell you here that's Virtuous Giving Bundle and the date. And then you would just click on this big crazy link right here, and that'll take you in to the import, and you'll see gifts sorted into those 3 categories there. Right, the match needed, update needed, ready for import, and then you can work your way through. You'd start at match needed, because that would be, hey, looks like new contacts. Either they don't exist at all, or the system didn't have enough data to get an exact match. So it might say, hey, here's some possibilities, but we're not sure. Match those, address anything that needs to be updated, and once everything's in ready for import, you would import those gifts. Same as what we did before. So the process is the same, right? The difference is how the data gets into here in the beginning. Either you key it in with checks, or they show up on their own because they came in through Virtuous Giving.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I know for some orgs, they might say, oh, well, we enter guests like twice a week, or we do it like once a week on Fridays. And this does kind of force a daily cadence, because you're going to have a bundle for each day. Now, you could let them sit for a couple of days, but the longer you let those sit, the harder it's going to be, especially with recurring gifts in terms of matching gifts to pledge payments. So I would say at the very least, I want to be doing this weekly, if not more often than that. And it shouldn't take too long. If it's only a few gifts each day, right, you should be able to clear it out pretty easily.
Right, okay.
Any questions about that?
So just to reiterate, you get 1 per day.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
From the Virtuous Giving, that automatic bundler.
Yes.
Right, and then so theoretically you could have two batches each day, right? Your manual batch of gifts, and then whatever comes through Virtuous Giving.
Okay.
So talk to me about receipting. What does receipting look like for you guys right now?
We do it on a weekly basis.
Okay.
And, it's a fairly manual process. And we do not use email receipting. We send out a paper receipt.
Is that by choice, or just because you haven't had the tools to do it?
A little bit of both. We haven't taken the time to set up the tool to do it. And we've thought about it, and this may be the occasion of us thinking more about it. And so what we do now is just basically manually generate a weekly letter that goes out.
Okay.
And we have a template, and it's kind of a laughable process of, printing out a thing with a pretty picture on it, copying that, and then using that as the paper to feed into the printer, and then we print it out individually. So it's very laborious.
Well, that's fun. Not awful. Not awful. So here's what you can do, and you can stay with that cadence of once per week. You can if you're going to be doing gift processing once a day and you want to send out those receipts on the same day, you can. That's up to you. If you want to add in email receipts, that's also up to you. I would say it's a good chance to, anytime you move to new software, it's a great chance to get a great excuse to have a touch point with your donors that is not explicitly, hey, give us your money.
Mhm.
right? Because that complaint all the time from donors is we only hear from you when you're asking for my money. But to say, hey, we've got new software and we want to use that to better communicate with you. How would you like to hear from us? How would you like to be receipted? Would you like to get email receipts?
Mhm.
Would you like to get, because some people will say flat out, if I ever get another piece of paper from you, I don't want to give you money. You're killing too many trees. Great, let's do that for you.
Mhm.
Fantastic, we love it.
Mhm.
So it's a great chance to ask them how they want to be receipted, and then you can store that preference as a tag on a contact record.
Right.
Who wants email? Who wants paper? Who only wants a year-end statement? That kind of thing.
Right.
Now, as far as your receipting goes in Virtuous, there's two pieces. There's building the template in Virtuous and then sending that out.
Mhm.
Okay, so the templates, if I go to the settings menu, go to odds and ends,
Mhm.
doesn't fit in any of these other neat little categories.
Mhm.
You can see there's two different receipt template builders here.
Mhm.
This one that's marked as the legacy receipt template builder,
Mhm.
this you can use. It requires being able to write HTML. Some people
Okay.
are great with that. They're comfortable with that.
Mhm.
Groovy. You can rock on.
So this,
For the rest of
I,
us,
yeah, before you go on, this might answer a question I had, but one of the recorded webinars talked about end of year
mhm.
templates. And then when I went to try and, follow along, I didn't see the same options in the odds and ends. And I'm assuming that what was talked about on that webinar was older and this is newer. Is that right?
Yeah, it has changed. In our most recent webinar, the one we just had a couple weeks ago, we actually talked about year-end receipting and how that looks
Oh,
in
okay.
this new
All right.
framework. Yep, and you can see
I,
the recording of that too.
so I think it's, so I think it was pretty straightforward to just build it like in the new receipt template. Is that right? Because I went in and fiddled and it looked like it was doing that where you just clicked. It was really
Yep.
easy to build.
And so it's kind of like using Word. You have that toolbar at the top. You can drop in all those merge fields. Here, let's look at your weekly receipt. Yep. No envelope information. Stellar. I'm going to show you a couple other things. I'm not going to build anything that's much more complicated than that, but I want to show you a few things. So number one, if you're doing email, it's going to ask you, hey, what's the subject line? Who's it coming from?
Uh-huh.
If you do paper, that's when you get the envelope options. Do you want a separate CSV to print labels? Do you want to download a separate PDF to print right on the envelopes? If you do,
Uh-huh.
what's the return address? Or you can do no envelopes. You do have to give that receipt a name. We're going to call this one training. And you do have the option over here for single gift per receipt or multiple gifts per receipt, right? And that multiple gifts per receipt, that's how you do those year-end statements, because that simply says take all the gifts, and group them by contact ID on a single receipt. So if I have 24 gifts for contact ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 24 gifts are going to be on a single receipt. For
Well,
your
question,
weekly, go ahead.
on the multiple, is there a place where you specify a date range on that, or is that defaulted?
We'll get there.
Okay.
For your weekly receipt or your daily receipts, that would just be a single gift per receipt usually, right? Unless you have a lot of people who frequently give multiple gifts each week.
Nope.
And then in here, right, so you can add images to the top. If you want to add that image on here, as opposed to printing on it, you can. You've got all those handy merge fields, right, to do neat things like the long receipt date. And then, the contact name. You can hit shift and enter if you want to do an address block, right? Because the default is to add a space in between. Unless you hit shift and enter, that'll eliminate that space to do your address block. And then dear whoever that person is, primary individual first name, thanks for your money. And then you have two options, right? You can either build the gift information into the body of the receipt, which some people do, right? So, hey, thank you so much for your gift of, go in here, blank, of which blank is tax deductible, right? Great. Or you can put in, what a lot of people like to do is build in what we call the gift table. So you might put in here, you know, see below for your records. And then down here, very bottom, you've got this gift table that you can add in. And it looks like this. Some people like it just for the formatting. But then you can manipulate this table because you do have all these other merge fields for gifts that show up here. Things like check number, right? Non-cash description and everything else that aren't in this table by default, right? The gift amount and the deductible gift amount. This just shows the deductible gift amount. So if you want to manipulate this, you can use your table tools to either add a new column, right? I could say, hey, look, the gift ID is not important. Either I want to delete that column, or I could go in here and change the name, change the merge field, put in something new, either way. Right here, let's say that I want to delete that column because I don't worry about that. And this isn't for my tribute gifts, so I delete that column, right? And then I end up with something that looks like this. Great. Okay, you can preview it, see what it looks like. Almost looks like a real receipt. You can download a PDF because when you see it on the screen, it might look a little different than what it looks like when it really renders as a PDF, especially depending on your browser and your operating system, everything else. So I always recommend if you're trying to judge, you know, hey, is this really going to work? Don't just, I mean, the preview is a good way to start because you notice it looks different here than it does when I'm typing, but download the PDF, print it out, see what you really get, right, with that test. Then you can save it. And so let's save and go back. There we go.
You know, you're talking about the gift table. Is it correct that the gift table from the merge choices, that's just a predefined template table that then, as you were showing, I can go in and edit to my heart's content? Correct. Right. Okay, got it.
For the paper receipts, the email receipts are a little bit different. And you can see that in our article on receipts. That uses the same editor as the Virtuous Marketing emails. But there, the tables are pre-built, and what you have is you have multiple table options. You can pick table A, B, C, D, E, and then you'll see what fields are in each one of those tables.
But I can't edit those.
Correct. You have to just pick from one, and that's why we give you multiple choices there, so that you can get the right mix. With the paper receipt editor, because of the way that renderer works, I can go in and manipulate the table itself. Now, once this is set, when I do my receipting, that actually happens from a gift query. And you ask the question of, well, how do I set the range of what's included in that statement or the multiple gifts? You set that range with your gift query. Your gift query is going to define which gifts are being receipted. Okay? So create a gift query. And this should be something that you create and you save. You make it a favorite. You can put it on your desktop so that you can just run it every time you need to generate receipts. Is the idea. And so you have a couple of options for selecting the gifts that you want to receipt when you're doing this on a daily or a weekly basis. We do have some folks that like to do this by batch. Great. Although that seems like a lot of work to me. Some people prefer it. That's fine. Or you can do it by date. And if you're going to receipt by date, my advice to you, because the tendency is to use gift date, but really what you're going to want to use is the create date, right? Because the gift date is whatever value I type in. So when you were doing entry, like last week, right, on Thursday, you probably dated all those gifts December 31st, but you were doing entry on like January 3rd. Well, then if I were receipting by gift date and I said, give me all the gifts dated January 3rd, I won't get any of those gifts I just entered. But create date is the date that the import was completed, the date they were added to Virtuous. No manipulation allowed, no wiggle room in there. That's a pretty hard date. So if I wanted to get all the gifts I entered today, no matter what, if I post-dated them or backdated them or whatever, create date's going to give me those. And that way I make sure I get them to receipt. And the easy thing to do is to use the relative dates, right? Those work with the before and after operators. So I don't have to change this every time.
Mhm.
So if I wanted all the gifts I entered today, I would say, give me all the gifts where the create date is after yesterday.
Mhm.
That's everything today. If I'm doing it for the week on a Friday, right, give me everything that was entered after last Sunday.
Mhm.
And then just save it and lock it in, and I don't have to mess with it,
Mhm.
right? So let's do this because I know we entered gifts today. And then I can add in any other parameters that I want. So again, if I'm storing people's receipt preference in a tag, right, tag any is paper receipt, because we're going to do our mailed receipt.
Mhm.
Then I'd have another query, tag any is email receipt for my email receipts.
Mhm.
Right? So you'd have two different queries to run for that.
Mhm.
If I need to do any special receipting based on whether they have a tribute, based on, hey, if they gave to this project, the receipt is slightly different, great. All that I can control from my query. I have complete control over which gifts are going in to this particular run of receipts.
Mhm.
Here we'll keep it basic because we don't have a lot going on in the sandbox, but let's save this as our receipt query.
Mhm.
And we'll call it our training receipt query. Save that. Now, when I execute that query, that's where I get to generate my receipts, is from the results screen, right? So I want to run that query, execute that query rather, and then from the results screen, I can receipt gifts. And receipting gifts does two things. Number one, it will add a receipt date for those gifts. The receipt date is how the system knows a receipt was sent, right? If there's a receipt date, hey, a receipt was sent and it was sent on this date.
Mhm.
If there is no receipt date, then as far as Virtuous is concerned, the gift hasn't been receipted yet.
Mhm.
And then the second thing it does is it actually generates the receipts. So it does double the work. And so here we've got 9 gifts that went in today. There's the
Mhm.
ones that we imported and the ones that the system seeded for you. It does that each day.
Mhm.
We'll go to actions. We're going to receipt gifts. And you'll see it asks you, well, what should the receipt date be? Are you doing this today?
Mhm.
We have some clients who say, well, no, I'm not going to send them until tomorrow. So date it tomorrow. Fine. It asks you, do you want to generate a receipt for all 9 unreceipted gifts? We assume yes. If
Mhm.
any of these gifts already had a receipt date on them, you'd see a separate checkbox. It
Mhm.
says, did you also want to generate a receipt for the one that's been receipted previously? And
Okay.
that won't be checked by default.
Right.
We assume you don't want to double receipt it,
Right.
right? But so the system will check on that for you. You don't have to build it into your query or anything. It'll let you know if any of these have receipt dates.
Mhm.
And then down here, we're going to do PDFs because we're using those paper ones, right? And then here's all the paper receipts. So there's the one called training. I can preview it to make sure it's what I want.
Mhm.
There it is. And then if I hit save, that'll mark all these gifts as having been receipted, and it will generate an export with all the PDFs for all the receipts.
Mhm.
And then I can just print those out and send them out. If it's an email receipt, as soon as I hit save, it marks the gifts and sends the emails.
Okay.
Done.
So it's that save button that actually uh, activates this.
Correct.
Okay.
That is it.
Okay. And by the way, just incidentally, on your preview, all of your previews are pulling from this Alfred Moore
Yep.
data. So I won't ever see a preview with my actual data from.
Correct. If you wanted to do that, you'd have to generate a receipt,
Uh-huh.
right, for a specific gift or donor as a test receipt to see.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Because you'll also see in some of these that are built in right out of the box, right, like the standard gift receipt, you'll just see a slightly different preview for John and Jane Smith.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Now, the other thing is, let's say that after you've done this, you get a call from Harrison Ford, and he says, hey, I never got the receipt for my $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Ford. Let me take care of that for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the contact record, he's a bad example. Don't do that, Scott. He doesn't have an email address. So let's say it's Harmonia in Georgie, right? Harmonia calls you, says, what gives? Didn't get my $100 receipt. I'm so sorry. You're such a great donor. Not really. Let me take care of that for you. If you go to their contact record and you look at the gift, this little piece of paper in here, that's your receipt options.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll let me receipt just that single gift. and I could select the template that I want, right? And it defaults to email because that's usually a great way to send a replacement. Hey, I'm so sorry you didn't get it in the mail. Let me shoot you an email. Is this still the right email address to use? Great, right? If they have multiple email addresses, you can select one. If they don't have an email address on their record, sometimes it's a good excuse to get one. If you're going to send it via PDF, great. Pick the template, print it out, you can resend it. So you can redo a single receipt right from there.
If I go to, this is a more general question, but where do I see the archive of receipts? So like, say Harmonia said, hey, I didn't get a receipt. Where would I go and look to say, oh yeah, they did get a receipt, they just didn't find it or whatever?
Well, number one, her gift would be marked as receipted with the receipt date.
Okay.
Right, so you'd say, hey, it looks like it was sent out on the 7th.
Okay.
And then any receipts that are sent, you can actually see a copy of it here on the receipts tab.
All right, got it.
Yep.
And on the exported PDFs that would be mailed ones, are those archived anywhere within Virtuous, or is that something that if I wanted to archive, I would archive those exports?
You'd see it here.
Okay.
Again, here's the receipt that was sent. But then, yeah, if you wanted to keep like a paper file copy, you'd have to do that.
But I would see in that receipt, even if it's a PDF that I print that was exported, I would see that in that receipt. Okay. Okay.
And that's it. We only went a couple minutes over. That's not too bad.
Yeah, good job.
There we go.
Okay.
Well, hey, you have the recording from the first session already on Teamwork. That's on the Files tab. And then I'll add this recording here today, probably by the end of the day. I have a few more sessions stacked up here.
Okay.
And then I think tomorrow we're chatting about campaigns.
We are, and not only campaigns, but something else. I think we have 2 tomorrow, or is it even 3? Could it be?
Oh, you never know.
I just noticed a whole flurry.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, we've got campaigns in the morning and admin in the afternoon.
Campaigns,
so 2 tomorrow.
Yes. Campaigns in the morning and admin 12, noon to 1. That's right.
There we go.
Awesome.
All right. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.